Okay, so I wanted to write something on the thumbnail. Now I know I don't have the ass, I'm just saying that everyone has an ass, and this dress does a good job at accentuating it. Hi, my name's Filippa. So I saw this dress on Pinterest and I was very inspired, so I made this flat sketch and I decided to make it, and here we are. Oh, and happy 2023. I hope you're doing good. We're coping, let's be honest. So let's just get right into it, shall we? Materials. So I found this fabric in the desk cabinet, as it is called at my school. Why? Because people who passed on also passed on their fabrics to my school and to me. I'm not sure exactly what material it is, but pretty sure there's some wool in there, but there might also be a bit of plastic because something melted onto my iron. Next, for the lining fabric, this is definitely 100% polyester or other plastic fibers. I got it graciously from a friend who got it from her scumbag ex's grandma. Like before he was ex, we didn't know he was a scumbag. Or I mean, some of his behavior did suggest. I also used 14 buttons. These were 1 centimeter in diameter. And finally, I used some iron-on interfacing for stability behind the buttons and buttonholes. You need at least the width of your planned overlap with seam and fringe allowance, but I'd add a bit more because you never know. I mean, I guess someone knows, just not me included. It doesn't hurt. Moving on to the pattern. If I made a video of exactly how I made this pattern, it would be way too long and confusing, like for me too. So instead, I thought I'd just add my measurements as well as my actual bodily measurements, and you could compare and make mock-ups. At least one, but I really made 4.5 mock-ups for this one. Yeah, when you want a woven fabric to fit you like your birthday suit, you're gonna have to expect a lot of minor alterations and varied results until you are not perfectly happy, but as good as it's gonna get. If you want to make the pattern from scratch yourself, all you need is a skirt and bodice block pattern. Join them by the waist and move the skirt dart into the dart of the bodice to make one whole dart in the back. Move your bust dart to the side if it isn't already there, and remove the other front darts by taking it in the equivalent in the side, starting from the waist. Then obviously just shape the neckline and armhole how you want. I lowered mine a bit and made them straighter. And finally, add however much overlapping you want center front for the buttons and buttonholes. I added 8 centimeters. Remember to shape them after the neckline if you want that look. So the very first step after cutting out all the pattern pieces is to fringe the fringe. So gently but violently, I went at the seam allowance with my seam ripper. And this took for freaking ever, so I suggest listening to a good podcast like this one or rewatch Criminal Minds. I had time for both. It's good to mention when making your pattern, the straighter the armhole and neckline, the easier it will be to fringe evenly, and just in general it takes less time. I thought I wanted a pretty round armhole in the front, and it still works to fringe, but it just doesn't really come out as nice. Also, with this model, you could definitely make a pretty straight armhole even in the front. Once happy with all the fringed edges, I used a comb to brush them out evenly and then cut them all to the same length. Then, sort of tracing the outer fabric, I cut out the interfacing strips for the 2 center fronts. So then I ironed those on, placing an ugly fabric on top so that we don't accidentally get glue on the iron. I also pressed the fringed edges a bit to make them stiffer and a bit curly. This will make them shrink a bit, but I find it nicer when it wants to stay in place and looks a bit better as well. I forgot to film it, but while ironing, I also pressed down 1 centimeter along top and bottom of each belt piece so that it would be easy to pin. So then to the usually always first step, pinning and sewing all the darts together. Don't forget the darts of the lining as well. I also pinned the 2 belt pieces together. When sewing darts, it's important to gradually make it slimmer until the very end of the dart, where it should be sewn into the last tiny millimeter of the edge, kind of in this banana shape. And by the tip, do not backstitch, just cut it off with a generous amount of thread. And to finish them off, you tie little knots at the end. I do doubles because I'm paranoid. And to flatten them out nicely, I cut them down the middle as far as the scissor will go essentially, and then they can be pressed down. So I've been feeling a bit lonely since I moved to this island last summer. Before the move, I lived in this big city. I lived in an apartment with my friend, so we'd hang out at home. Less than 5 minutes walk away lived my two besties, and we would run around the city most days, and the days we didn't, we'd do shenanigans at school. Then we all moved and I ended up on this island. I thought I would make a bunch of friends, and I did try, but eventually being an introvert, it gets really tiring, and I got disheartened when it didn't seem to really pan out that way. So I've been by myself a lot this year, which I think can do a lot of things to a person. Thankfully, I'm at the same time not alone at all, like a single minute of the day, because I'm living with my bestest friend in the world, my big sister, and we do all kinds of soul-fulfilling things. The original plan was for us to move to a tiny cabin, have 10 guinea pigs, and explore the island every day. Now the tiny cabin turned into a big house. We have 0 guinea pigs and counting, but we are exploring and going on fun little adventures several times a week, given the car doesn't give out. It has happened twice. I'm taking the time to enjoy this island and the calm and get to know myself. I go to beaches, explore the woods, I do yoga by the fire, do my journaling, drink my teas, and I think it's fine that this year didn't turn out the way I thought it would. So next step, we want to make it into a dress. So I pin the shoulder and side seams right sides together. Okay, so this clip is not in the order of how I did it, but in the order of how I would do it now that I'm so much older and wiser. I would pin and sew it together like we did the outer fabric in the same step. Then I would iron down the 1 cm seam allowance along the edges. However, I ironed it down first and then sewed, which was stupid because the press was not really final and I needed to use some of the seam allowance in order for it to fit with the outer fabric. So when pressing, you could either press 1 cm, however it's tricky to iron a round shape like this, so instead you could press 1/2 cm, then fold it over another 1/2 cm. I ended up just pressing down 1/2 cm everywhere because the lining somehow came out a bit too small to be sewn together with the outer fabric without stretching, which is not good. It will create ugly creases and wrinkles in the outer fabric, but thankfully there was enough seam allowance that I could use to prevent it. I had to seam rip and redo some parts though. Then I pressed down all the darts. So then I did film this, however it got deleted somehow. I'm very sorry, but anyways, I tried the dress on just to see where and how I wanted the belt to sit and how much shorter I wanted to make it because I had purposely made it a bit bigger. I cut off about 5 cm and it ended up kind of at my natural waist, the part in your side that goes in, and so I pinned and sewed that in place in the side seam. Make sure it doesn't end up too visible from the front because it's ugly. Then it was time to join outer fabric and lining. Firstly, the seams I can sew right sides together are the center front of the bottom front piece and the bottom hem. Don't forget to match up the seams. So I sewed that in place and it was so freaking sunny, it was blinding. So I had to wear my sunnies, as they're called in Australia. One of many things I've learned from binge watching Bonai Rescue. Anyways, then I decided to press those down nice and crisp. The outer fabric 4 cm and the lining 2 cm. So overflowing a bit, like in a nice suit jacket, if you've ever studied one of those. In the corner, you just kind of fold it in like so. I think it looks very neat and professional. Then I also wanted to understitch the lining at the center front so that it stays nice in place, and whatever the hell that means is sewing the lining down with all the seam allowances. I sewed just 2 or 3 millimeters away from the outer fabric. Time to stitch the rest of the lining in place, this time wrong sides facing. Now we're actually going to sew on the lining side to make our lives easier. So make sure your bottom thread isn't all tangled up, or you have the wrong thread tension or something, or it is going to be very visible and very ugly. So I started pinning from the other center front and matched up all the seams and worked my way to the other side. Try not to stretch it too much so that it creates wrinkles, and then I also pinned down that top center front. And so I sewed everything in place, just a few millimeters away from the edge. Now it was time to decide where to place the buttons, so I put it on. Hi, okay, so I'm just trying it on now to see how and where I want the buttons. So what I first did was that I marked out 8 centimeters on this underlying one, so that I could then pin it later, so that I make sure that it's straight, this the overlapping part. And also while it was off, I quickly hand sewed on some of the buttons, kind of how and where I thought I wanted it to sit, and I'm pretty happy with this. Also, I decided that these buttons are just going to be decorative because it feels like this is going to stay in place anyways by how tight it is. Also a lot less work, so that is always nice. Since I was happy with how these looked, I marked with a pen that goes away in water around the first few buttons. Then I measured everything to make sure I had the same placement and space between the buttonholes. And then I measured and marked out all 7 buttonholes, and did the same thing but for the buttons on the other side. So then I switched to my buttonhole foot that came with my sewing machine. I put the button in the little slot at the back, but what I like to do is take it out and make it 2 steps smaller because it will be worn out or in, and I like when it's a bit more rigid and in place. Of course, I first made a lot of tests on a piece of the same fabric folded in half to replicate the thickness. This was to make sure I knew how to position the foot to my little marks and make them all as similar and leveled as possible. So then I just let it do its thing for 7 times over. Actually, I did it 8 times. I redid one that was not perfectly aligned with the others, and yes, you can actually seam rip a buttonhole before you cut it, obviously, given that your fabrics can withstand it and that you do it very carefully. It's risky business, but you gotta risk it to get the biscuit, and in this case the biscuit is avoiding that irk of knowing your buttonholes aren't perfectly aligned. No one else will know, maybe not even you in the mirror, but trust, the irk will be there. So then I cut those open with my seam ripper. Be careful not to cut straight through with that thing. At my old sewing school, we were actually not allowed to do it this way, unless you put a pin at the very end. You can also use a scissor and cut into it, but you know, the only way to learn to not do something because someone else did and it had horrific consequences is to not care and do it anyways until you're the one who has to face those horrific consequences. So in order to mark and position the 7 buttons out to fit the buttonholes perfectly, I pinned the overlapping part where I wanted it to land when finished, 8 centimeters in, just like I did when trying it on. Then in the very outer corner of each buttonhole, the corner towards the center front, I marked with my pen. So not in the middle of the buttonhole, because the button will be pressed towards this side because the dress is tight, and of course also because of our movement. So then moving on to the 14 buttons to be attached, I used my button foot. It also very conveniently came with my machine when I bought it, but you can do this on the machine without this or any foot as well. So I switched to the zigzag stitch and made it as wide as I need, and went over to the back of the machine to lower down the feed dogs so that the button stays put while I zigzag it in place. Make sure that the needle will hit the holes every time before going at it, because yes, my dumbass has broken a needle this way before. So repeat for all 14 buttons. Now for the loose threads, you can just cut them off, but it always annoys me when it comes undone and then suddenly you've got 14 little threads popping out. So I cut them off pretty long, and once all the buttons were in place, I hand sewed them down to the inner layer and made double knots and then cut them off. Unnecessary, but doesn't take too much time and leaves a nice finish. Speaking of finished, it's finished. We are finished, and here is the result.